Hello, everyone, and welcome to this 4 o'clock session of OER 22. I'm delighted to be joined by Clint Lalonde and Amanda Coolidge, who are joining us from BC campus. Very early in the morning for them, so thank you for joining us at this time. And Clint and Amanda are here to talk to us about how it started, how it's going, celebrating 10 years of open textbooks in British Columbia. So I'll hand over to you, Clint, and please enjoy the rest of the session.
Thank you, Caroline. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for spending some time with us here on what is a beautiful day here in Victoria, British Columbia. A nice early morning. Well, it's not super early, but it's 8 o'clock in the morning here. Really happy to have you along for this session. My name is Clint Lalonde. I'm a project manager for open education with an organization called BC Campus, and we'll tell you a little bit about that in just a moment. I'm also an associate faculty member with the School of Education and Technology at Royal Roads University. And today we want to have a little bit of a celebration to talk about a project that we have worked on for the last 10 years now, which is our open textbook collection here in the province of British Columbia. We want to tell you a little bit about how it started, how it's going, and some of the lessons that we have learned over the past 10 years. And I'm being joined today by my colleague, Amanda Coolidge.
Hi, everyone. Really nice to be here this morning or your afternoon. My name is Amanda Coolidge. I am the Director of Open Education at BC Campus.
So what you're seeing on the screen here is just a little bit of a visual representation of our journey for the past 10 years, represented in the websites that we have had for the collection starting in 2012. And a couple of various iterations as we go along here, and a new collection which we have just launched and will be launching formally in June for our open textbook collection. So we wanted to kind of visually represent that in this opening slide here.
Great, thanks. So one of the things Clint and I would like to do is start by acknowledging and recognizing that we are currently on the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, Wasanic, and Esquimalt Songhees nations of the Algonquin peoples. These peoples have walked gently on the unceded territories where we are grateful to live, work, and play. And we're committed to building relationships with the First Peoples here based in honor and respect. And we thank them for their hospitality. So I thought we'd start off with a little bit about BC Campus. So BC Campus, we are innovators, implementers, leaders, and learners, and our primary focus is to support the post-secondary institutions of British Columbia as they adopt, adapt, and evolve their teaching and learning practices to create a better experience for students. We achieve this through a supportive approach to advanced pedagogies, a focus on impactful practice, and a collaboration with partners in British Columbia and around the world. Our mandate is to provide teaching and learning, educational technology, and open education support to the post-secondary institutions. And we're funded primarily through our Ministry of Advanced Education and Skills Training. We provide collaborative leadership that brings innovative resources and effective expertise together to create awareness, understanding, and adoption of available curricular resources. So ultimately, our goal is to improve student learning.
Okay, so we thought we'd take you on a little bit of a journey here and tell you a little bit about our collection and how our project actually started, because we've been doing this now for 10 years, hosting a fairly large open textbook repository that is focused on for educators in British Columbia. And we thought we'd take you a little bit about how it started. So, and I want to go back to 2012 here and what the situation was like here in Canada and in North America, especially, where we were seeing issues where students were not purchasing their textbook because of cost. And this was some of the research that was done early on by the Student Public Interest Research Group that showed 65% of students had not purchased a textbook for a course because of the cost of textbooks. So the costs were becoming a barrier for students. And it's not just a an economic, of course, that's an economic issue as well. But there were also pedagogical implications to high textbook costs in 2012. And this actually still continues today, where we're seeing students that do not purchase the textbook because of cost. Students take fewer courses because of the cost. They opt to go without textbooks because of the high costs of textbooks. So this was the issue that we were trying to deal with in 2012 when we started our open textbook collection. And it started with some funding that was announced at the Open Education Conference in 2012 in Vancouver, British Columbia, when our Minister of Advanced Education at the time, John Yap, announced that he would provide some funding to BC Campus to create a repository of 40 open textbooks that that aligned with the highest enrolled first and second year subject areas in British Columbia post-secondary institutions. So we got to work on that in 2012. And the first thing that we decided to do, we have a long history in open education. So we know that there are tons of great resources that are already out there. So we didn't want to just start creating textbooks. We wanted to be sure to go out and find out what was out there. There were other projects at the time like OpenStax, the Open Textbook Library at the University of Minnesota, lots of projects out there that were creating open textbooks. So the first thing that we did is we found out what the top 40 subject areas were based in enrollment here in British Columbia. And we went out and we kind of surveyed what was already out there to try to find resources to put in our repository. So that was sort of the first step. Then what we did is when we found gaps for things that were maybe a little bit more specialized, we decided to fund some creations. So we released some grant funding, brought some subject matter experts on, and created some. Sorry, I can't stop those notifications for some reason.
We can't see them, Clint. You're fine.
Oh, okay, good. So we funded some new creations when needed, when we needed to create some textbooks, and we ended up with a collection that had 40 textbooks fairly quickly for the first year of the project. Something we also did, we recognized that instructors wanted to allay some of the issues around quality of textbooks, which was a big issue in 2012, 2013 when the project first began. And, are these good quality resources? So we instituted a peer review system for the textbooks in our collection, which continues to this day and has become a huge factor in educators deciding to adopt these resources. And we didn't do sort of crowdsourced reviews. We actually we worked with instructors who were local here in British Columbia at the institutions. We have 25 public post-secondary institutions that we work with here in British Columbia. And we worked with educators in discipline areas within our local institutions to do the reviews of the textbooks in the collection. So that, it's a fairly small community here in British Columbia. When educators came to see the textbooks, they would see reviews from educators that they knew and have probably worked with in the past. So that was an important consideration for us. So our first year, we actually felt like we had some pretty good success. We spent 2012 and the early part of 2013 getting this up to date and getting it up and running. And we saw some adoptions in that first year, and we had realized about $60,000 in student savings by the end of that first year. Fast forward to how it's going in 2022, we now have a collection of close to 400 open textbooks, and as well as a variety of publishing guides and other content within our collection. We have been tracking savings all along for the 10 years. We've just passed the $30 million mark in student savings on textbooks, which is a significant number, and still kind of blows me away that we have managed to do this with open educational resources and open textbooks to make that kind of a massive impact on student savings. We've got close to 6,000 adoptions of the open textbooks in the province, which, in 2012, if somebody would have said, we would have 6,000 adoptions throughout the province, I don't know if I would have, it's what we'd hoped for, but I don't know if we actually thought that we could achieve it. So very happy to see these kinds of results in 10 years. And we have funded about 200 different projects. Some of these are open textbook creation projects, but we've also done things like adaptations of existing resources in there. And we've funded projects like a recent project that I worked on, which was the H5P and Open Homework Systems project, which was to build out the textbooks that we have and add some additional functionality into the textbooks in terms of student self-assessments and kind of more interactive elements. So certainly, from that original project of creating the repository of 40 textbooks, we now have done a ton of other projects, and the collection has grown and grown and grown. I'll hand this over to Amanda now,
Okay.
and she can start
Great.
on some of the lessons we have learned.
Awesome. Thanks, Clint. So lessons learned. So we're going to talk a little bit about, I think we have 5 different lessons learned that we have, we thought we would highlight for all of you at OER 2022. So the first one is, can you go to the next slide? Community building. So one of the things we learned right away is that a community of open education advocates makes a huge difference. So we started off by going to libraries, going to teaching and learning centers, and really engaging the support systems at the institutions. We also engaged in a content creation sprint where we brought together faculty for the creation of a regionalized geography open textbooks. And communities are really at the heart of what we do. And Clint wrote a blog post a couple of years ago, which I love to reference, because he said, ultimately, for a project to succeed and be sustainable, it has to be about developing a community. And so one of the things I'll just be a little bit more specific about in particular is librarians. So at the start of the project in 2012, we gathered librarians together to create the very first open education librarians community in British Columbia. And the BC Open Education Librarians, they're a supportive community to help learn about open education practices. And they build support for librarians and faculty in advocating for the use of OER in their home institutions by sharing knowledge and practices that can impact higher education. And the librarians who make up this community have worked together to create LibGuides across the institutions, shared best practices, presented at multiple conferences, and most importantly, they've worked together to ensure that access to educational resources is unencumbered by ownership and cost. Next slide. Another area that we wanted to focus on as a lesson learned is the importance of research and the importance of efficacy and tracking metrics. So we've been very focused on building a research community in British Columbia, in particular because we noticed that a lot of the open education research was very US-centric. And in order to really make an impact across faculty as well as administration at institutions, we wanted to be able to gather our own metrics. So in 2014, we started what is called the Faculty Fellows Program, and that brings instructors together to engage in research that determines the efficacy of open textbook use in BC institutions. This has really branched out not just for the efficacy of open textbook, but really looking at open education pedagogical practice. And the fellows also provide mentorship to faculty who are new to open resources. They do presentations and consultation and also conduct outreach work. And we've been fortunate to partner also with the OER Research Hub out of the UK. And we have all of these other partnerships as well that have really helped us with this further research. Next slide, Clint. I think this one's for you.
Yeah, this is a little bit about paying attention to the technology. And when we started the project, we wanted to, being that we were an open education project, we wanted to kind of sort of walk the walk and use open source technologies as much as possible, because we felt it was just a part of the ethos of working in open education. And so when we started, we did some research and looked around for different publishing platforms, because we knew at some point we would have to do some of our own publishing. And we stumbled upon Pressbooks. and did some early work in going back to 2012, 2013, when Pressbooks was just a bit of a startup. Not quite the force that they are today, which I'm so happy to see that it has become a publishing platform that is being used quite extensively and widely. And much credit to Hugh McGuire and Pressbooks for starting off open source and realizing that there was a niche there that needed to be filled in open textbook publishing. So we really wanted to focus and have an emphasis on using open technologies. But one of the lessons we learned about open technologies, and anybody who's worked with open source technologies would know, is that not only do you benefit from getting access to open source software, but there is a commitment that you need to make in order to give something back to that open source community. And so one of the ways that we gave back to Pressbooks, even though we weren't financially using them because it was an open source plugin at the time, is we gave back developer time. So we had a developer named Brad Payne, and we continue to do this. We submit code back to Pressbooks for use cases that work for both Pressbooks and BC Campus. So if you are going to do an open textbook project in the future, and or any project, and you do use open source software, consider the ways in which you can give back to the open source software that you are using, because you are deriving benefit from that software. So whether it's a financial contribution back to support them in the form of a donation or a fund, or if you can provide back some developer resources to that open source project, it is important to give back and not just use the open source software.
So another area that we also would say is a lesson learned is the importance of involving students in the advocacy of open resources. One of the things we realized early on is that the advocacy work that was happening was really missing that integral piece of the audience member, and the audience being the student. And so we started working with student unions across the province to talk to them about the why of open resources and the how. One of the things that we articulated to the students is, especially those students who were in the leadership team of student unions, is that you may not be able to impact tuition rates, and you may not be able to impact housing costs, which are the two biggest costs for students here in British Columbia, but you can have an impact on the course materials. And so together with the BC Federation of Students, which is a larger organization body that works with all of the student unions across the province, we started helping them out with campaigns. So things like, this one, I just spent censored on textbooks, and just sort of being able to help them and learn more about outreach and how to start having the conversation with faculty so that it's not something where they're being turned away from using open resources, but something that they want to engage in to really work with their work alongside the students. Next slide. So finally, another area that we wanted to highlight that we actually didn't think we would be doing is actually policy. So one of the lessons learned is the importance of really working with institutions on policy creation. So one of the things that we started to do in particular was reaching out to some of the open education advocates at their institutions to find out how one would be able to put open education policy within a strategic plan, in an e-learning plan, in some sort of administrative level way of doing that. And there's a couple things that we did. One of the things that I always recommend to people when they're looking at possibly putting an open education policy into their institutions is to take a look at your institution's mission or mandate. There's often a lot of wording involved in the mission, vision, or mandate of a university or institution that says words like access or affordability or inclusion or equity. And all of these words really culminate what is open education. So that's really important. And another thing was also to start looking at ways in which policy can influence tenure and promotion. So one of the number one reasons that faculty were not adopting open education resources is because they said it didn't affect their tenure and promotion. And so actually alongside with the students at the University of British Columbia, they were able to implement or put in policy the acceptance of open educational resources development and creation as part of the tenure and promotion package, which is actually one of the first tenure and promotion policies in North America that highlights open resources. So it's really important, I think, at the end of the day, to really think about what is the holistic view of open education. So we've talked about community, research, open education, technology, students, and policy. And so at the end of the day, the major lesson learned is in order to really advance open resources at your institution, it's not going to be a one stream endeavor. It's something that's going to take the entire ecosystem of your institution.
And there we go. Some lessons learned and a little bit of a celebration for making it to this 10-year milestone for the open textbook collection here in British Columbia. We're open to any questions that you might have, and I know there's a bit of a delay in getting the questions back to us from the YouTube channel. But oh, hi, Caroline. Any questions rolling in?
Not so far, just praise from Catherine saying yay for policy.
Catherine, hi.
Definitely agree with that. It's been fantastic to hear about what you've managed to achieve in 10 years. So many big changes, not just, in the textbooks themselves, but changing that policy in the institutions. So thank you for sharing that. We've also got a comment from Martin who says that was really comprehensive. So thanks for that. If anyone does have any questions, pop them in the chat. A follow-up from Catherine about your wonderful lessons learned. So I think lots of praise coming in for the work that you've done. So I've got two questions now. They're all flooding in. First one from Martin. You set out a lot of lessons, but in order to get started, what would you say is the most important first step?
Clint?
There were a lot of important first steps, and Mary Burgess, who's our executive director at BC Campus, was there right from the very start, who could probably speak to some important first steps. But I know one of the first important steps that I was involved in was trying to be focused. That really did help us, having the constraints for putting the collection together of 40 textbooks and 40 subject areas. And, that really helped. But then also reaching out to tap into people who had already done this. One of the first events that we had, probably 3 or 4 months after the announcement was made from the ministry here, is we had our first open textbook summit, and we brought together in a room in Vancouver a bunch of people who had worked on open education and who are working on open textbook initiatives. And we just did a big brainstorming. And the original intent for that was really about sharing. It was kind of like, you bring lists of the resources that you have, we'll bring lists of the resources that we have. Let's see how we can share and collaborate. And I think that was a really early lesson, making those connections and those relationships early on with people who are already doing the same kind of work and similar work, which, in 2022 doesn't sound all that radical, but, in 2012, the open education conferences were still quite small, and Insular didn't have like 1,000 people like they do now. So we actually had a bunch of people that sat in a table in a room. I think there was about 20 or 25 of us representing, some of the major open education projects that were happening in North America at that time. And so we started collaborating early on and connecting with people early on. And I think that was a really important piece into the success of the project.
And we have a question from Catherine. What is in store for the next 10 years?
That's a great question. I don't know about the next 10 years, but I can tell you that in the next year, we are officially launching a new collection. This will be based on open course collection. So the opportunity to not just share out open textbooks, but also to share out course materials from lesson plans to PowerPoints to instructor guides, H5P, all of the resources needed for one to either mirror a course or perhaps take a look at something that we would say is an exemplary. We've really worked hard to include equity, diversity, and inclusion within the development of these courses, indigenization and decolonization, and looking at alternative forms of assessment. So we're really looking forward to that. I think on our Twitter page, you can actually see like a teaser video, which is super fun about that. In the future for the next 10 years, I really think one of the things we've actually seen within the first 10 years that I hope will continue to happen is that open education practice has really been infused throughout our organization to the point where every single department at our institution is implementing open practice. And so what I'm hoping is that will then sort of filter out to as examples for other organizations and or our ministry to also continually improve practice so that we see more open work.
Great. Thank you for that. We've got time for one more question, one from Jenny Heyman. Likely you have achieved good support and buy-in from early adopters. What are strategies for encouraging the majority, especially college faculty, where tenure is not on the table?
Yeah, one thing that I think has worked for us in that regard is, and first I should say that I don't think there's any education strategy that is ever going to be adopted by a majority of educators, or, education is pretty specialized and niche. But that being said, I think one of the things that we have done is been able to leverage a lot of those early adopters and have them become advocates, and being able to sort of seed advocates at the institutions who are early adopters, and really having developing those peer-to-peer connections, educator to educator, discipline to discipline, having people within those departments and within those disciplines speak to why they adopted open educational resources and open textbooks, and why they are involved and invested in the open education community. And slowly it builds and slowly it builds. And I think that has been, one of the keys to kind of breaking through and taking a long-term approach for it too. I mean, the Open Textbook Project has been running for 10 years in British Columbia, but open education in British Columbia happened way before that. A whole bunch of early people who have, since the Open Courseware Initiative was announced at MIT, I think that kind of spurred things on. So we've had people involved in open education for 20 years now. And certainly having that long view has helped as well.
Great. So I'll just finish with this comment saying, Amanda, that sounds wonderful. Your lessons learned show how adaptable you've been in responding to the evolving needs of students, educators, and society.
Well, Catherine, you're just the sweetest ever. Yeah, Catherine and Martin, nice to see your questions and comments, and Jenny too. It's nice to feel the support from our crew.
So I'll just finish by saying thank you so much, Clint and Amanda, for that really interesting presentation. It's been really great to hear about all the good work that you're doing. So thank you for sharing that with us, and look forward to seeing you and hear more about it in the future.
Thank you. We'll see you at OER 32.
OER 32, next 10 years. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye.